talking that news you ain't heard of, cause you know it's getting buried. Social justice, yeah, the stuff you need to know about. Fucking politics that the corporate news won't cover. You know they don't think that you could see under, but you can now, cause the people we cover, they may not be famous, but their stories should be heard. Yeah, every voice matters, we should rise and fall together, and that's why.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Monday. I was just telling Andy that the lineup today it sucks ass. So sorry, but let's deal with some hard reality before we get in with the week. And I know here in the U.S. we have a massive holiday, 4th of July. So keep that in mind when we go through some of our topics this morning. What is it we're celebrating? So this theme will continue through the week. So without further ado, my extra super duper lovely today and multi-talented co-host, Andy. Good morning, Andy.
Good morning. What did I do to deserve the accolades?
You're just all dressed up and nice. You have a nice colored shirt. It's clean. It's fresh. You got the fresh, bright whites on today, and you got a haircut. So it's I'm jealous.
Okay,
So jealous.
Well, sucks to be you. No, I appreciate the compliment. It's actually, I'm in quite a good mood because, as you say, Canada has their holiday coming up as well. We're 3 days before, and any Canadian with a inferiority complex to the United States would say, ours is first, right? So, but we have an economy that is still semi-closed, and for safety's sake, it's being opened slowly as safety would dictate. And we are currently in phase 2 of 4 stages. And because of this, my region that I live in Peterborough area, hasn't had a new COVID case in 9 days now, and currently at 95. 92 of those people have recovered. 1 is still sick, and 2 deaths. Mm-hmm. So there is reason to be optimistic about the Canadian future and the fact that the private parks have opened up, and my family are joining 2 other families to go camping in our trailer starting on Wednesday on Canada Day. And so, things are looking a little bit rosier in our country than it did a couple of months ago. And unfortunately, I can't say the same about my American friends.
No, and this is where we have you beat, because we are already in step 4, and we're handling that so epically bad that we're going back to step 1 in many states. So Florida, here in Illinois, we're trying to get to step 4, and we suck. So we still have to explain to some of our neighbors why wearing a mask reduces the risk and why you should do it. So we have the slow kids.
Yes. See, it reminds me, your stages of opening remind me of King Arthur and the Holy Grail movie from Monty Python, where King Arthur counted 1, 2, 5.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Which is problematic.
Right.
Trying to keep people alive, although that doesn't seem to be the case considering the government. But.
No, and I think here we've gone with the tactic that we're disposable. We're all disposable, and if you're a patriot, you are willing to die for your country to go out and go to a bar. So that's the level we're at, and I have seen now that the rest of the world is looking at doing banning U.S. travelers, and I don't blame you. I honestly don't. So, yeah, that's where we're at. So,
it can be very scary. It's not inconceivable to me that with different countries in the world, how they're at different levels of understanding the problems and the difficulties that we have in the world with neoliberal regimes and, you know, large corporations, oil companies that are, you know, hurtling us towards climate change that will make the planet uninhabitable. And eventually the world's saying, okay, yeah, we've usually followed the US's lead because the US is the strongest country in the world and most powerful and the richest. But when it comes down to a matter of survival, we're going to be talking about maybe moving on without you. And
a trial separation, and
that means that could very well mean that the world treats the U.S. like the U.S. currently treats Iran, right, or Cuba, where we're cutting off your borders, we're not doing trade with you, you know, we're going to sanction, and you certainly don't have the ability to you know, take care of yourselves without help from the different markets of the world, right? You pretty much sent all of your manufacturing offshore. Mm-hmm. You are no longer an energy sovereign nation. You're no longer a food sovereign nation, especially in the pandemic when people that especially work in food supply areas of the economy can't provide for everyone, right? So I'm horrified that thought that that's what it could come down to, right? That the rest of the world is going to understand that, okay, we got to do something now because we're all about to die.
Well, okay, so I'm going to push back a little bit, and I get your perception of where we are. However, what we're seeing is some good news stories coming out from regular individuals. So, for example, I live on the edge of civilization, the suburban urban sprawl. Behind me is nothing but farms. So Illinois alone, just Illinois, we produce enough food here to feed the entire country twice. But our supply chain, you know, to your point, is not set up that way. Most of our farmers are exporters, not just to other states, but to other countries. And if something were to happen, like supply chain now, what we're seeing is local farmers are reaching out locally, and they've started social media posts, Facebook pages, things like this. So what my family did was we were privileged enough to have some of our COVID, the first CARES Act COVID money left over. And we went in with 3 other families and bought a cow. And there is there's a plant here, a local family owned, that is halal and kosher. So we bought a quarter of a cow. And the price I paid was between $2 and $3.50 a pound. So it was ground beef and all sorts of other things. So then we took that purchase, it was 4 cases of beef, and we were able to share that with other families. So what we're seeing is the development of a new sort of supply chain that has been kind of interesting to watch how individuals and communities are actually coming together regardless of political ideology. We all recognize we can't starve, right? So we recognize that some of our neighbors are relying on the food banks. So we have been making adjustments in the way that we operate to do that. And those are the stories that you're really not going to see because, you know, they're not profitable to cover that. But it is happening in communities across, as well as, you know, sustainable gardening. In Chicago, people are working together to make rooftop gardens where there weren't any, patio gardens where they hadn't. So we're kind of seeing slowly, little by little, kind of that victory garden mentality from World War II. We're just not seeing it from the top down. It's bottom up, the grassroots. So of course, corporate media is not going to cover any of that because they're dealing with Whole Foods and their bigger supply, Walmart, things like that. So yeah, that's just not going to get covered. But Yeah, well, we've got a long way to go, and we're going to get there together, or we're not. That's basically the binary choice that we have here. So,
Yeah, and
one,
I agree with that, and I know I've seen that in different cultures. I've actually talked to a number of local Cuban people about the problems that they've had because of the embargoes from the U.S. that have really been, the main problems with that country and how they've been cut off because of, quite honestly, lies and deceit, right? But that when things have gotten the worst, people have, taken care of each other because they couldn't rely on the government anymore. I think that it's an actual change in the U.S. and a paradigm shift of the people really has to come about, right?
Mhm.
I think that as a majority, Americans have to understand that, come to a consensus that the government isn't looking out for them, that they're more interested in making cash in the short term than helping the citizenry in the future. And I quite honestly, if I could buy a large abandoned factory and start making pitchforks and torches, I think that would be a great industry to get into now.
right? Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I think when we look at what the Black Lives Matter protest is really about, you have well, we've talked about it here. It's due process, the basics of due process and equal protection. But below that are all these systemic issues that are also being addressed. So our counterparts on the right or in mainstream media don't really get it. But what they're looking at is the top of that iceberg. And I've seen a nice little graphic that depicts this. But below that are all the things that cross political boundaries about stagnant wages and the cost of healthcare and all of these things that are aligned to progressive policy. And that is what this is about, right? So it's not just reparations and equal protection. That's the start. What we want to do is dismantle the systemic racism and inequality that we have here that goes back to the supply chain and food and all of these things. We have seen such a breakdown in the way the systems actually operate because of the pandemic, because of the protests, that you can't help but I can't imagine how someone's going to make the argument that we need to go back to status quo, which apparently the Democrats are trying to make now, which is astounding to
Well,
me.
it depends on what your status quo was, right? Like, I mean, if you're a white person of means living in a gated community somewhere in the country where your needs are being taken care of by your own wealth, then of course you want to go back to that, right? Because a lot of times I observe that Americans not only judge themselves by how much they own, but how much more they own than the people below them.
Yeah, keeping up with the Joneses and pole vaulting over them. So to that point, one of the things that came out this weekend, I just posted a link to our article. The DNC now has gotten all their votes in. So they're going to do a virtual convention. That means delegates that are being elected now throughout the primary, it's all virtual. So with this, what most people don't recognize is, and we put it in this article, just posted the link to it, with that vote it was under the guise of COVID, which, okay, we want to have a safe convention. But
it didn't stop the primaries, but it'll stop the convention.
Right, so there's that. And then in that rules, you are giving all authority to this really small group. David MacDonald is one of them. David MacDonald is a DNC delegate member out of Washington State. And he has been dead set on reversing the super delegate reform. So he has just been handed the keys to do that. So it'll be very interesting to see how this convention shapes up, because right now they're working on all of those rules. Now, part of the problem is we needed Sanders to earn a certain number of delegates. He had to get to the 15% threshold in each one of the primary to be awarded delegates. So as of Friday, we saw that he finally was awarded the win in Colorado, but they have not adjusted the delegate numbers. Right now, Biden still has more delegates than Sanders, which makes no sense. And then looking at Kentucky and these other New York primaries, he did get his 15% threshold, so he'll be getting more delegates. So he needed at least, I believe it was 1,900 delegates. I'll have to double check that number. It's in the article.
I think that's the total to win.
No, there's well, let me pull up the damn article that I wrote. How about that?
That would counter it perfectly, yeah.
So 1,200. He needs 1,200 delegates to win, and I think he was like 80 shy. So it's a 25% of the delegates, and what that does is it gives him authority as a candidate, whether his campaign's suspended or not, to put representatives on these committees, virtual or otherwise. So this is the rules and bylaws. And that is what we're fighting for, in addition to the down ballot races with progressives that we talked about on Friday. So, yeah, so that is something that you're going to have to definitely keep an eye on. What exactly is David MacDonald going to do in the Democratic Party? Are they going to bring back these supers? Are they going to get rid of the reforms that were won in 2016? How is this going to shape out? So he and his small cadre now have the keys to everything. So way to go, DNC members.
Yeah, well, and I don't think anybody can be surprised by that, right? Like, I mean, it's it's corruption run by corrupt people. Wow.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly it. So I know that other people have argued that, well, there's some good people and they just don't understand. And I'm like, okay, so take that same argument and apply it to police officers, right? So we have seen there's the one police officer out of New Jersey who is now suing the district attorney because the district attorney sat on audio recorded evidence of corruption within the police department. So that good officer is trying to do good, but the system is so corrupt. What do you do? And I think you can apply that same argument to the DNC, right? So maybe this person is nice and maybe they're kind to you. But look at what's going on. The corruption is just so pervasive that, yeah, garbage in, garbage out. And that's what I think we're seeing right now with the...
And I think that corruption just, like, I mean, I don't think there's levels of corruption. Once you've been corrupted, right, it's like being all in a Texas Hold'em poker game, right? You're all in, you're done. If you're bluffing... you're screwed, right? And as more corruptions present themselves, a more ability to become more corrupt presents itself. These people have to do it because they are corrupt, right? It's not like, okay, well, now I'm going to draw the line. Now I'm going to take the high road, although, you know, I've been on the pavement my entire career. It doesn't work that way. It's you're bought and paid for. You know, you're owned by the parts of the society that want to do people harm for their own gain anyways, right? So thinking that these people are going to change their stripes, it's not going to happen. Right. So
right. And it goes back to the lesser argument, the lesser evil argument. And I heard that when I was a candidate with the Democratic Party, that, it's the lesser of two evils. We have to, and I would look at these people who were heads of my party and was like, wait, what? Why is any evil okay? And it was just kind of an awakening for me that, particularly my local party, did not represent the same ideals that I thought the Democratic Party stood for. So here's where we are year over year over year. And like you said, just a little bit of corruption is just like a little bit of cancer. When is too much? When do you call it out? So
yeah, exactly. Like, yeah. I mean, it's the definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over and expecting a different result. Well, as far as I can tell, you've got 2000, or 2020 is exactly like 2016, just a different name on that person that's running. There's no difference, absolutely no difference, right? The whole thing played out exactly the same. It was stolen away from the person that has the support that should have won, right? Expecting that the neoliberal candidate is going to choose a progressive to be VP, is going to change the way that Joe Biden is the same age as Bernie Sanders. He's done everything the exact same. He's in a Republican way his entire political career. Do not expect that he is going to change his ways once he becomes president, if he were to win, which I seriously doubt, because he's got to make it to November, and eventually he's going to have to come out of the basement where he is and speak. And they're going to have a field day with him. And so you're going to have another 4 years of Trump. And of course, the progressives will get blamed.
Of course, they already started. They started that blame game months ago, and this is why the down ballot races matter so much. So we need to get to that super majority and flip the Senate. So we still have some elections coming up, and in fact, Colorado ends on the 30th. So that's one Senate seat with Andrew Romanoff.
Yeah.
So if you haven't already cast your ballot and sent it in Colorado, please do so. And we'll be talking more about Colorado a little bit later in this program. But for now, I want to get back to something that was released last week. This is Department of Justice under Attorney General William Barr, who himself is facing more than his share of criticism over impartiality and some fuzzy lines around what is legal and what isn't. So he issued this memo yesterday, and I put it up, and we posted it on our Facebook and our Twitter feed. But this was dated from June 26. And what was interesting about this is he's announcing this new Justice Task Force on violent anti-government extremists. This is what caught my attention. Anti-government extremists. That's pretty damn vague. That could be anybody with this administration, right? So anybody who's not with us is against us. So who did they name here? So they did name out the Boogaloo Boys. This is, we've covered these guys before, and you've seen them on the headline. The reason they call themselves the Boogaloo Boys is that is their code word for a civil war. So they're trying to start yet another civil war. So these are the guys that have been shooting, instigating, trying to elevate riots, things like this. So while people are trying to make the argument that it's the protesters who are rioting, actually it's these outside instigators, right? So the Boogaloo Boys, some white supremacists, and then some other people that they're trying to associate with anti-fascism, who were disrupting things. So none of these groups have anything to do with the protests that are going on. They're just trying to use that as a backdrop to instigate things. So Barr did name the Boogaloo Boys, and those, including those who support the Boogaloo Boys and those who self-identify as Antifa. So anybody who has said that they're against fascism, you're on this list, the way that this is written. And that bothered me quite a bit, because we've already had targeting of journalists, which is unconstitutional. Targeting of attorneys in New York, the Green Hats, the Observers, that's unconstitutional. And now here the Attorney General of the United States is saying that if you are anti-fascist, you are against the government. So the way that this is written, I mean, help me out here with my grammar people. What we're saying is that our government is fascist, and if you are against the government, you're on the list. So
and you would think that small bit of logic would be able to be followed by most Americans.
Right.
Yet here we are.
Yeah, so apparently we have a fascist government now, according to Barr. So you talk about taking off the blinders. Holy cow, here it is right here. So Antifa is not an organization. It is not structured. It doesn't have a PO box, doesn't collect money. It's people who stood up to the fascists who were doing all sorts of crazy shit, like the 3%ers and these right-wing militia groups who had just pole vaulted over the line. So that's who the Antifa people were. And there are some bad actors within them, but then we come to find out that those bad actors were actually, some were Antifa anarchists and some were actually right-wing people posing as Antifa. So we had all of these people taking liberties and trying to disrail the message of the Black Lives Matter protests. So that was going on. So what I found here was an application of this policy that I think is interesting, in particular for activists and progressives. So this story came out, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. So these two activists have been charged with felony terrorism. So you can see their pictures over here on the side. They're scary, apparently. These are middle-aged white women who, here's what they did. So they, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, they have been protesting the pollution from these companies. And what they did was there was this festival that they have, and they went out and picked up all of these plastic pellets that these companies have been injecting into products and things like this. So it's really hurting the environment. And what they did was they took all of the plastics, because they had tried to get legislation passed and get these companies to adhere to the law. They wouldn't do it. So they formed a Louisiana bucket brigade, collected all of the plastic and waste products from the Gulf Coast, and packaged it up neatly and sent it to executives at these companies who were opposing, with lobby dollars and other things, opposing the regulation of the waterways. So that is why they were charged, because they scared these corporate executives with these boxes, and they included a note and explained exactly what this was. Here's the plastic that your company has put into our waterways and affected our children, our families, everything else. So that alone got them terrorism charges. And what was interesting is they turned themselves in when they found out that they were facing charges, and they were immediately handcuffed and shackled as terrorists.
Well, sure, because you could tell they're dangerous.
Right. Felony terrorizing. So I'm not sure how much jail time that is, but I want to say that's 20 to 30. Oh, no, here it is. 15 years imprisonment is what they're facing right now. So in context of what Attorney General Barr has issued, and then we see an application of terrorism applied to these activists. Is this raising any alarm bells here? I mean,
If it's not, it should.
Yeah. So this is part of where my concern comes in, because where are we at here? We just had our Attorney General say that we are fascists, apparently, and it's just, the memo itself is so broadly written that violent means whatever they decide it means. And anybody who's not with us is against us. That could be anybody at any time. So that's how that goes. Now, putting this all in context of the July 4th holiday, what is it we celebrate on July 4th? I mean, I don't know what you guys celebrate in Canada Day, but here,
well, we celebrate the fact that we're Canada and not the U.S., apparently. No offense.
That's funny, that phrase, no offense. I'm going to say something really offensive and then just clear it with no offense.
Yeah. So that was my, I thought it was my inside voice. Apparently it was not.
Yeah.
I don't want, I do want to put in a disclaimer that, I have so many friends that are American, and I absolutely love being there. It's just, I just, your, your current choices of president are a absolutely horrid human being that is current president, that is orange. And you never trust anything that is orange, right? And so, and
Except the Lorax. The Lorax,
well,
you can trust the Lorax.
sure, but the choice to replace him is someone that is just slightly different, right? And that's it.
Right, and this is where we're seeing social media posts they're outright propaganda, where they're trying to say you had all those colleges and universities that were, whatever college for Bernie Sanders, where they said never Biden, and now they're starting to roll out comments from somebody who doesn't necessarily represent the organization saying, well, I feel like I got to. And okay, do what you got to do. I'm never going to vote shame somebody, but I will push back on vote shaming. So, it is what it is. But real quick, good morning, Jeffrey. He's posting all kind of comments. Thank you, Jeffrey, for tuning in. And he says these charges are laughable and the DA should throw them out right away. Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree. But not enough people are aware of it. And, we always go back. In the U.S., part of our propaganda machine was, well, if you don't do anything wrong, why would you oppose this? All you have to do is not break the law.
You have nothing to fear if you haven't done anything wrong, right?
Right. But in this memo, how do you know what's wrong? You no longer know what qualifies anymore. And that's part of the problem. So the other piece, and I'm gonna do my best not to cry on this one. I will say, while I was gathering information and reading up on it and doing the research, it was tough. So I want to make sure that we get time to talk about both of these. But it's a tale of two Elizas, right? So going back to Colorado, Colorado, you have your vote going on right now. And over the weekend, there was a memorial service for Elijah McLean. Elijah died a year ago. He was murdered by 3 Aurora Police Department officers. I know this area very, very well. So this young gentleman, he was 23 years old. I don't know if he was on the spectrum, but he was very much an introvert and a lovely, warm, engaging personality. And if you read up on what happened to him, he, like so many young people, was walking home. Now, this is a kid that volunteered at animal shelters, and he played the violin, and he would bring his violin and play for the kittens there. This is just the kind of person he was. And walking home one evening, he had his earbuds in and he wore a hat because he was anemic. And people who are anemic, chronically anemic, they're just cold all the time. So he was wearing a hat, and an officer stopped him because he looked suspicious. Well, that's, in this country, what is supposed to happen is you have to be walking while black is not enough reason to stop someone. So the way that this went down is he asked Elijah where he's going. He's like, hey, I'm going home. He didn't hear him at first, but the officer asked for his ID. An officer cannot ask for your ID. The way it's supposed to work is, am I being detained? Yes. Okay. Why am I being detained? What crime did I commit? And if the officer can't give you one, you should be free to go. This is how it's supposed to work. It's not what happened in Elijah's case. What happened is this officer and 2 others started beating him, threw him into a wall, and then jumped on him and held him in a chokehold. Now, Elijah was 140 pounds at 23 years old. This is a slim, tiny individual. And they killed him. So what they did was they had try to asphyxiate him. He's panicked. And throughout all of this audio, he is just so kind and so sweet. He's like, please, I'm sorry, the whole time. And these officers ignored it. And because, I don't know, 3 guys are trying to kill him, he's maybe panicked. They called in an EMT person who gave him a sedative that was 2 to 3 times what would have been safe for Elijah, and it caused him to go into cardiac arrest. So Elijah passed away. And what happened this weekend was, here's where I'm going to get misty. The 3 officers who were involved in this have not been charged, even though we have transcripts and information coming out that they were purposely trying to hide their actions. They were taking off their body cams. One of them actually said to another one, hey, dude, move your camera, because it was pointed right at him while he had Elijah in a chokehold. So you can see right there intent to violate their own procedures and intent to violate this citizen's rights. These 3 officers have not been charged. They're still free. And Elijah is dead. So what happened over the weekend was a bunch of people came out to a memorial service, including Elijah's mother, and they brought their string instruments and they played this free concert in memorial to Elijah. So I'm going to show some of that here. I managed to get a little bit of a video from Twitter. So. Video doesn't show. For a second. So one thing that the video didn't show that came out as a result of this is lined up around this entire group of peaceful people was officers in riot gear, full-out riot gear, armed with tear gas canisters. You saw all the children there. You saw all the people armed only with cellos and violins and violas. And then you had Elijah's mother speaking there, and at every moment that she was speaking, she had a sniper trained on her head.
Why?
Exactly. Why? What was Elijah's mother going to do that posed a risk to officers in full riot gear and protection? What was she going to do with that microphone that was going to put them at risk for all of those people who were there praying and having a peaceful memorial service for a young man who was wrongfully murdered?
By them.
By them. So this goes back to the whole idea that the Black Lives Matter protest and this push for justice is one side of the argument. And then we have police officers interjecting themselves as the opposition. They are not peaceful bystanders by any stretch. They are the opposition. So this is where the conflict comes from, right? So I think it was very telling the way that the police had decided to react to that. So they could have pulled back. They did not have to have snipers trained on her. They didn't have to do any of this. They could have been respectful. But what we're seeing all across the country is where you have one good officer, like in Florida, you have the chief of police who knelt with peaceful protesters. And the response was the entire SWAT team resigned in protest of their own commander. So this is the problem that we have, right? You do have some good officers. However, for so long, that corruption that you talked about, Andy, little by little by little, we are now in a situation where we have authoritarian rule, judge, jury, and executioner enacted by police officers, and then knowing that there might be a little pushback, they choose to cover it up, and we have district attorneys who are not only helping them, but the Attorney General of the United States of America is condoning this.
Right. It's almost like the police forces and their unions, which are really, part of the major problem. And I don't say that lightly, considering I was a union activist for the 30 years in my working career before I retired, that they're almost putting it out there in your face, right? We are corrupt. We don't care if you can see it. We're not going to back down. We're going to continue to do the things that we do and crush it, right? Which, I think that they think that that's going to be an effective thing. I don't. I think that that's potentially just blows up in your face, right? Because that is why the people that are protesting are out there. That's why we are in the streets protesting. It's because of this. You thinking that you can defeat it by continuing to do what you do is just fueling the protesters, right? We're talking about working people who don't have anything. The little bit that they had is disappearing because of the pandemic and the horrible response to it. And the jobs that are gone, and the people that are dying. It gets to a point, and this was our good friend, Professor Yule said, that the reason that the civil rights movement in the 60s was successful is because those people of color that were involved in the civil rights movement had nothing to lose.
Right.
So they weren't worried about that they were going to put it all on the line to make their lives better. And slowly, it doesn't matter what race you are, right? If you're not in the upper class of society that are the only people that are benefiting from the unfettered capitalist neoliberal regimes that are running the show, it's now all races that are starting to come to grips with this and realize that, we don't have anything to lose now.
Well, and to your point, earlier in this program, we talked about the iceberg effect, but a statistic bears this out, that the majority of protesters in these Black Lives Matter protests across the country are white. That is what's scaring the DOJ. Because you could marginalize, you could put screen images on TV in the 50s and 60s of masses of Black people out there marching with one or two white people. Now, when you have Provo, Utah, 99% white, and they are out there, that's some scary stuff, because what that says, to your point, Andy, is that we are fighting not just for Black people, but we recognize the injustice across everything. And when you have white people going, yeah, this is my brother, my sister over here, who happens to be a person of color, and I want it to stop now. Now you have an entirely different scenario. And that is what's scaring everybody. So one thing that I thought was interesting with Barr and his task force, there are two people that he named in that memo that I want to call attention to. Craig Carpentino. Craig Carpentino is a lawyer out of New Jersey. So you might know Craig's name prior to this memo because there was an attorney in the Southern District of New York who didn't know that they were being replaced. This was Jeffrey Berman. Jeffrey Berman was involved in investigating President Trump for the impeachment and some other things going on in the Southern District of New York. So Jeffrey Berman learned that he was being fired from a news report. He didn't know anything about it, so he refused to step down. Well, the person who was named to replace him was this Craig Carpentino. So Craig Carpentino is supposed to take over for Jeffrey Berman on July 3rd. At the same time, he was being appointed to this task force. So New Jersey, what's going on, guys? There seems to be some some confusion there. And then the other one is Erin Neely Cox. She is she's out of Texas, the Northern District for Texas. And this is where her background gets interesting. Cybersecurity and investigation consulting firms. So when the DOJ is looking for Antifa, guess where they're going to start looking? Okay, so keep that in mind. But then real quickly, because I know we're running out of time here, the other Elijah that I want to talk about. This one was interesting. I hadn't heard anything about it. I could not find a news report on it, which is rare. I'm going to keep digging on this one, but this is Elijah Witherspoon out of South Carolina, Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. So I'm going to put up some information about Mr. Witherspoon, because I think that this one is, there's something going on here. So Mr. Witherspoon, a young man, he's half black, half, I want to say Puerto Rican, but I'm not sure. I don't want to get that wrong, but he's a mixed ethnicity, very well known. He went missing on the 25th, and he went boating with a bunch of friends. Now, here's what was interesting, is he was the only person of color on the boat. The rest of them are white. And then he didn't return. He was the only one who died. They recovered his body in the river. And what was interesting about this is this is not a big boat. This was a small boat with 7 people who came back without one of their friends. And each and every one of them, when questioned separately, had a different story.
Well, they don't sound like they're real good friends.
No. So what happened? Somebody's covering up for someone else. And how is it that this guy, maybe it's a racial issue, maybe it isn't. But the point, here's where it gets important. You have 7 people who know what happened. 7 people with 7 different stories, and police in South Carolina decide that they are not going to pursue it. It's just, you know what? It was a bad day for everybody, so we're just going to let it go. Well, his family is saying, we're not going to let this go. We want to know what happened. And it's, the more you try to hide something, the more you can kind of figure the something ain't right here. And I go back to the old phrase, scratch a lie, find a thief. Something happened here. And you cannot find a single news story on this person. Not even an old one. It's like all of Google has been scrubbed from who is this guy? What happened to Witherspoon? So his family has started this petition, and I just posted this online, to reopen the investigation. So Andy, you remember when we had Mr. Epstein on, and he was talking about how court dockets just like to resolve the docket, not necessarily solve the crime or address the issue. That appears to be what happened here, that they were just like, we're not going to investigate it. We're not going to talk to these 7 people. We're not going to do anything. It's just easier to say, okay, he died. He drowned. But Elijah could swim. He could swim very well. So his family is asking questions, and they're asking for justice. They want to know what happened. And I think that anybody who loses a loved one, and you have 7 people who know what happened, but they're not talking, would that not be frustrating for everyone? I would think.
Well, and especially the death of, someone close to you. Closure is a huge deal, right? And how can you get closure if there's all this mystery about how this person came to their end, right? Like I know I wouldn't. I'd turn over every stone I could.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and let's say it was an accident, right? Let's say Elijah did something stupid, drinking, whatever. How do these people not come back with the same story? Something's wrong here, and I think the family is right to start asking questions and try and get the investigation reopened. So I did post their they've got a petition, a change petition, but Mount Pleasant, South Carolina is where this happened, and it just happened a few days ago. So I'm not sure why it goes back to people apparently are committing suicide in trees now across from a city hall, and they just happen to be black. Right? So open a check case. I don't think so. I don't think, and this is part of what the whole thing is about, right? Did Elijah matter? According to Mount Pleasant Police, no. And that has to change. So I would encourage the people who were involved in this particular situation, just a little bit of empathy, just a little bit, to understand what his family's going through. It's time to step up and do the right thing, because this, Andy, to your point, this is your test, your moment where you're going to let a little bit of corruption, just a little bit of a lie, so your own comfort is maintained at the expense of this family, at the expense of this individual. It's not okay. So
it's not okay with some people, where I think that it's easy for it to be okay because it's just a part of the daily news cycle, right? But even in this case, it's not even part of the news cycle. So
no, and that one piqued my interest, because I'm like, how is there no news, not even local news? I was like, something is amiss here. So so I wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, and I did reach out to his aunt Debbie to get a little more background on this. What's going on in Mount Pleasant, and why are you getting so much pushback there? What are the stories that are going on? So we'll see if we can get a statement from her, maybe even get a good interview with her, so that we can help elevate this story, because I'm a mom. I would want to know what happened. So yeah, justice for Elijah, and we have two Elijahs that I wanted to talk about this morning. So yeah, that was our Happy Fun Monday program. Yeah.
Well, there's stories that we need to talk about, that need to be talked about, right? And it's clear that this doesn't drive a news cycle in mainstream media, because it's counter to the owners of those media outlets' narrative, right? So unfortunately, it's up to us to do that, and we don't have the same budget that they have. So
yeah,
but that's what we're working towards, and that's why we do what we do. So
that's exactly right. So I think Andy was hinting at a Patreon contribution. So if not, I will. We have a Patreon account that we would ask, if you're enjoying the programming and you want to support independent media for $3 a month, we ask you to do so. It's patreon.com/Progressive Insider. Or you can make a one-time something as low as $1, paypal.me/Progressive Insider, and we welcome that contribution, because it does cost money for these subscriptions, and then time and effort, when we could absolutely be doing much of anything else. We felt that this was far more important to bring news stories that obviously aren't being covered elsewhere. So please consider it. So with that, Andy, I know you got to get out of here. You've got appointments and vacations starting, so I'm going to let you get to it. Any last words for this happy Monday?
No, I think we've depressed everyone enough for one day. I do have a narrative that I'd like to talk about on Wednesday when we get together about protests, and I did want to speak about the podcast guest that we had a couple of weekends ago when Rami Jose Frimpong came on, and he had some very interesting thoughts on looting and that kind of thing. So I wanted to kind of make that connection because I thought it was important for people to, especially white people, to understand the thought processes about what's going on and how people are pushing back against looting and destruction of property. How, you know, the U.S. since the Civil War has enabled that, and so that'll be Wednesday. So.
Okay, that would be great. We'll all tune in for that one. And then just a quick plug. We had Brandon with DLF last night. He had some really good. First, it was very funny, but he had some really good insight into the Sacramento Karen video, where from his perspective, there were no innocents in this, and he really went through and broke it down in a way that I think that everybody can understand. So that is on our YouTube and our Facebook page, and it'll be on our website today. And then the commentary that Rome had about, in particular, the Jamal Bowman victory speech from his primary. I think that these are all small snippets and tools, particularly for white people to start to understand and gain some empathy here. And I think that's part of what's missing. So tune into all of that. It's all across all of our social networks. So we will have more of that. And then we've got a follow-up interview with Dan Whitfield, who's running against Tom Cotton. That's coming up this week. Just some more excellent programming and some writing that will be coming out this week. So stay tuned and catch us back here for this program on Wednesday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern. So with that, we'll get out of here and try to enjoy the rest of your Monday. Thank you.
Take care.